Hey there! So I'm going to try to do this all in under 15 minutes. This video is an intro to genetics, and then we also, at the end of this, we're going to get into worksheet 1 and how to set up Punnett squares. So bear with me. I'm just going to explain about Gregor Mendel, and then we're going to look at genotypes and phenotypes as well. So Gregor Mendel is a pretty big deal, and the reason he's a pretty big deal is he came up with many principles or laws dealing with the inheritance of characteristics. These laws we still use today, and the reason this is so amazing is he ran his experiments with pea plants from the years 1856 to the year 1865, which is way before genetics has taken off as a major field of science. So the fact that he was able to do this at this time is outstanding. And like I said, many of his principles and laws we still use today. These laws are as follows. We have the law of dominance, and this is basically saying that we have dominant genes and we have recessive genes. Dominant genes typically mask your recessive genes. You may have heard of this before we even started this chapter, and that is fine. The law of segregation. To segregate means to separate something. So this is the principle that members of each pair of genes, so one gene from mom, one gene from dad, separates during gamete formation, which you guys saw when we learned about meiosis last chapter. Then you have the law of independent assortment, and this tells us that genes happen independently from other genes. For example, just because you have blonde hair doesn't mean you're automatically going to have blue eyes. There are people that have blonde hair that have green eyes or brown eyes. And just because you have brown hair doesn't mean you're going to have brown eyes. There are people with brown hair that have blue eyes and whatnot. So this says that unless, your genes are very close on a chromosome, typically, they're going to be independent of each other. So once again, this chapter is the genetics chapter, and it is the study of heredity. And heredity is the passage of traits from parents of offspring. And this is done through the gametes with the sperm and egg and the chromosomes that are held within those gametes. The whole concept of this chapter is that your chromosomes have many genes on them, and those genes code for your different traits. So just like a couple chapters ago, we had the whole concept of going from DNA to RNA to protein. Here you have chromosomes, and a smaller piece of that would be a gene. And then those genes code for your traits, which is what you see when you look at yourself in the mirror or when you look at somebody else. A human is actually estimated to have over 50,000 genes spread over your 46 chromosomes, and they hold the recipes for over 25,000 traits. These are just a few of those traits. You've got eye color, eye shape, your eyelashes, the length of your eyelashes, your blood type, your hair texture, your hair color, whether you have dimples or not, earlobe shape, tongue rolling, tongue folding, freckling, and etc. So there's many different traits, and they're all coded for by your genes. For each of your genetic traits, you have a pair of genes located on a pair of chromosomes from your pair of parents. So looking at the picture over here, we have a chromosome that you've gotten from mom and a chromosome you've gotten from dad when you were conceived, if you will. These chromosomes look identical, and they only look identical because they have the same types of genes on them. They would not code, however, for the same type of gene, for the same gene, I mean. So for example, if mom, this blue band here, for example, say mom gave you the gene for blue eyes, dad over here has also given you a gene for eye color, say it's for brown. So you have a blue gene and a brown gene. What are you going to exhibit? What gene are you going to express? That's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. So once again, you have a pair of genes located on a pair of chromosomes that you got from your pair of parents. So if every human has just 2 genes for a trait, then why don't all humans look alike? Why doesn't every guy look like Zac Efron? Well, not all genes are the same. Some genes are dominant, like we said before, and some genes are recessive. So what's the deal with dominance and recessives? Typically, dominant genes are stronger and can hide or mask any other gene. And most of the time, there are some exceptions, but most of the time, dominant genes occur more often in the population. Recessive genes are the opposite of that. They're typically weaker, they are able to be hidden or masked by a dominant gene, and typically, with some exceptions, they occur less often in the population. So then we get into this idea of gene pair. If you have a pair of genes from mom that you've gotten from your parents, we're going to name those genes because it's science and that's what we do. So if you have two dominant genes, we're going to say that that is homozygous dominant because homo means same. So you have two genes that are the same and they are both dominant genes. If you have two recessive genes, we call that homozygous recessive. Homo, once again, means the same, so we have two that are the same, and they are both recessive. If you have a mixture of a dominant and a recessive gene, then you have two different genes, which is called a heterozygous gene pair. Hetero means different. When we talk about your gene pair, we refer to that as your genotype. And if you look at the word genotype, it's what type of genes you have. Do you have dominant genes or do you have recessive genes? So our three different genotypes are homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. If you look at here, this is what homozygous dominant looks like. If you have a dominant gene you've gotten from mom and a dominant gene that you've gotten from dad, we write it as follows. You have two capital D's, one from mom, one from dad. They're both the same and they're both dominant. We represent dominant genes with capital letters. This is what a homozygous recessive pair looks like. If you get a recessive gene from mom and a recessive gene from dad, we write recessive genes with lowercase letters. So here you see lowercase d, two that are the same and they are recessive. And this is what heterozygous would look like. You get a dominant gene from one parent and a recessive gene from the other parent, so we have to write a capital D and a lowercase d as your gene pair. Heterozygous, two that are different. We will always use the first letter of the uppercase in whatever the dominant gene or allele is, and the first letter lowercase of the same letter to represent the pair. So for example, if we're talking about freckling, we're going to use the letter F for freckles and little f for no freckles. So the genotype would be homozygous dominant would be two capital F's, heterozygous would be a capital and a lowercase f, and homozygous recessive would be two lowercase f's. Those would be our genotypes, or the types of genes we show. Then we have this other concept known as a phenotype. So genotypes are the types of genes we had. Your phenotype is what your physical type would be, or how the gene is being expressed, aka what it looks like, what you actually see. So your phenotype may be traits such as blue eyes, brown eyes, freckles, no freckles, dimples, brown hair, etc. So it is literally what you are seeing when you look at somebody. It is their phenotype. So here are some examples of phenotypes: brown eyes, blue eyes, attached earlobes, and unattached earlobes. Those would all be examples of phenotypes because it's what you're seeing. So a person who is little r for the trait of tongue rolling has a genotype of being homozygous recessive, and a phenotype of a non-roller would be expressed. So this person would not be able to roll their tongue. If a person who is capital F for the trait of earlobe attachment, they would have a genotype of homozygous dominant and a phenotype of having free earlobes. So those earlobes would not be attached to their face. So here we go. We're going to get into now worksheet 1. This is problem number 1 on worksheet 1. Okay, so I'm not going to have enough time on this video. I have a 15-minute window here, and through time I will actually not be able to finish. So I'm going to create a new video that is going to take you through how to do worksheet number 1. So if you are looking for that, that is a different video, worksheet 1, I will label it. Thank you for watching the intro. Hopefully this helped.